Welcome to the Charlevoix Stories Project, a continuation of Charlevoix oral traditions. Today is Wednesday, June 8th, 2016. We are at the Charlevoix Public Library in Charlevoix, Michigan. I'm Judith Ivan, Adult Services Assistant, and today I'm here with Hans Wiemer, a very interesting man who has been an architect in Charlevoix, has owned a business building on Bridge Street that's been integral for the business world in Charlevoix, and as it turns out, is a very talented artist. And we're here to talk about his life here in town for the last 50 years. Hans, before we get into your life here in Charlevoix, I would like to begin by having you explain a bit about your heritage and where you came from. You have come from a family that has dual citizenship in America and Germany, and you were born in Dusseldorf, Germany.
Yes, right.
So please tell us how that all happened.
Okay, well, about the dual citizenship, that's a little bit, I'm not all that sure about the technicalities on it, but the fact is that my father's father, or my grandfather, was born in Chicago, and that my great-grandfather and his wife already, and my great-grandmother had already immigrated to the United States in the middle of the 19th century, 1860, 1870, around there, and lived in Chicago, and I know the address, and I've been there where they lived, and it's been always interesting and fascinating to me. But what happened was that when my grandfather was still young, around the year 1894 or so, there were bad times in America, in particular in Chicago, all kinds of turmoil, the railroad strikes and what have you. And my great-grandfather having worked for the railroad at the time, and there were very bad times. And the situation were just horrendous from what I hear from my father's side there. And so then my great-grandparents, with their young son, moved back to Germany again, even though they had other relatives here in America. And so that's how my father then was born in Germany, and then subsequently myself. But my connection with America was strong because of that. On the other hand, before I was born, on my mother's side, my mother had two brothers and a sister who had immigrated to the United States, and so I had quite a connection there, and always back and forth, and my maternal side and paternal side. So America being born in Germany was always as important to me, let's say, as was Germany, because of the close relationship. I always had as many, if not more, relatives in America as I had in Germany, cousins and uncles and aunts. So that always been on my mind. Also, the whole cultural dichotomy about America and Germany always fascinated me. But as I was born in 1928, that was, of course, a turmoil time. Again, it seems like every 20-some years or so,
there's turmoil.
There's a big turmoil, big upheaval.
Yes.
And I believe that is because of our system and that we're working on, that every 20 to 30 years, something economically at least will have to happen. And so being born in 1928 in Germany, which were the Depression, of course, caused actually, ironically, by the Depression in America, because America had helped Germany after the First World War, but then got into the deep depression here, 1920, 29, couldn't help Germany anymore. Germany went into depression. And then, of course, the subsequent disaster of the Hitler regime, only because the times were right. And it's always what has happened when and how and what the conditions are. Those things do not suddenly exist or come out of nowhere. Fortunately, then, we survived that terrible time in Germany, which dictatorship definitely is
terrible.
It's not a good place to be under.
No, but tell us a little bit about the cultural an artistic world of Dusseldorf that
Yes.
you grew up in.
And
please.
then again, fortunately, I was born in Düsseldorf, which is a very cultural city, I may say. Beautiful city on the Rhine, and is basically defined by its culture. And that is a thing that went strong in Germany all the time, even during the war, even during the terrible destruction. Culture always was on the main
So people
agenda.
wanted to go to concerts.
Just got, no matter what happened, even during the war, and particularly after the war, my hometown Düsseldorf was almost completely destroyed. And what was rebuilt in the very beginning were the important thing, like the food distribution centers, but at the same time, the opera house, the playhouse, and the museums were full bore. And I, after the war, I was 16 years old, then actually worked on the construction to rebuild my hometown, because I had the ambition of becoming, or hope of becoming, an architect. And then the schools were closed, the universities hadn't opened yet, and I had to go back to high school, because everything that was done during the war, the diplomas, were null and void after the war, because they realized they were speeding things up, just like they did in America during the war, where they tried to get the boys and girls through college quick to get them into the service. So I then worked for a year and a half with the construction company, and which gave me good experience and to know what buildings are sort of roughly all about. And as an intern, I was then working with carpenters, masons, and all the different trades for a year and a half, for 3-4 months at a time, and gave me a pretty good overview of what buildings are all about, and helped me tremendously later on in life as an actual architect.
Tell me a little bit, you told me a story about how you were treated during these internships by the workers themselves.
Well, yeah, that of course is an interesting side of the story, and that is, if you're an apprentice, then you become a plumber, electrician, and the people there might look at you as their competition or so, but I, not ever wanting to be a plumber, electrician and so, but just wanted to know about it. The working men and the contractors realized that the more I would be familiar with their trade, the more helpful I would be, or the more competent I would be eventually as an architect. Yeah. So it benefited them and me both, and of course the benefit was we were rebuilding this completely destroyed city, which I loved, certainly, and it's just quite an experience to live in a place that is at one time beautiful, when, till I was about 10 years old, with the beautiful parks and everything, which Düsseldorf is, like a garden city, they call it. And then suddenly see it being destroyed bit by bit, and air raids every single night. And then coming back after the war, when the war was over, I was somewhere else. But when I finally got back, to see everything destroyed is quite an experience. And it's just sometimes amazing how you still have hope and aspiration.
Yeah.
And so we then...
Testament to the human spirit.
Yeah, it's amazing, yes. Yeah. And then I... And we were then so involved in rebuilding again, And then I then had to go back to high school, and then I elected to go to the highest level called Gymnasium in Germany, which then, and I went to humanistic gymnasium. They have different ones where you can have technical or the science, and I went to the humanistic, 4 different languages and all that, because I felt that was important to me, and I was always more drawn to the humanities, the old, the Romans and the Greeks, and in Europe, the Renaissance.
In art.
In the art, not only the old Rome, and then also the Romans had occupied part of Germany when they were in power, and there were still some of the ruins that I admired. And I always was fascinated that even old buildings that are only partially surviving still have beauty if they were once beautiful to begin with. You see, so that always fascinated me, and I was really into this and the architecture of the old, like Michelangelo and those guys who were not only artists, but architects, were artists, were painters, sculptors, engineers, all of these things, like a whole rounded sort of a total picture, which I was formed from that basically through my high school education. Wow. But the teachers emphasized that we spend a lot of time in the museums, and then it also so happens that my hometown, Düsseldorf, has a famous art academy, which was the art academy for American artists to visit and study before they ever discovered Paris. Most Americans think that all the American art, oh no, it was Düsseldorf, and specifically the famous painters like Bierstadt, who painted Yosemite and the Great Grand Canyon before photography, and is one of the biggest landscape painters in America, these huge, beautiful paintings, which actually open up the West to the Americans in the East, west of the Mississippi.
So you're talking about Dusseldorf being the center of painting in the early 1800s.
Right. Yeah, there would have been 1850, 1853, around there. And another one of those famous German painters who worked in America and Germany, but born in Germany, studied in Düsseldorf, Emanuel Leutze. I mentioned that to you before, and he's the one that painted George Washington crossing the Delaware, and I have to say it was painted in Düsseldorf at the Art Academy, and it's not the Delaware but the Rhine River, but the Academy is right on the Rhine River, and Washington is another American painter who had been studying there, and and also...
it's a great story, I love
it's
that.
It's the biggest in your picture right now at the Metropolitan. So I was very much influenced by that. And also, in those early days after the war, a friend of mine, we actually opened up an art studio. We call it atelier in German, or the French word. And it was mainly to have contact with the artistic community. And by artistic in a hometown like mine in Düsseldorf was not only painting, which we did, to make us sort of slide into this circle, but it also the performers at the opera house, the playhouse, the sculptors, and the architects. It was a whole. It's always been more than just one corner. It has to spread, and the more you are aware of things, and the same is then where ultimately architecture, in my opinion, is the culmination of all the things. It's got a beauty, function, and all these kind of things.
Yeah, you told me you thought that architecture was the mother of all arts.
Well, that's my conviction, and I'm sticking with it at least till the end of the interview, and you can convince me differently. And then again, that is, to put it all together, you see, and then in the common use of the language, architect is the highest accolade. If you call somebody the architect of the, whatever the New Deal or and it always seems to be in the common language the highest accolade. I think it's something to aspire to, and I think every time somebody comes to me, a young person who would like to study architecture, then I ask them again, why? And then I want to find out. If they say, well, they want to make a lot of money, I said, then don't. And if you want to be, whatever reason, I want to know if they're really interested in the humanities and the culture and all that. And I usually tell them, just, if you don't get that in school, or wherever, then you got to go out and find it. I always, besides my good schooling, which I believe I had, I always like to travel. Fortunately, And through the turmoil during the war years and all that, I was able to get moved around quite a bit, somewhat involuntarily, sometimes voluntarily. I got to see a lot of different things, like different countries. I lived in different countries during my early years, which exposed me to other people, other cultures, other Moors and other architecture, which I fascinated, you know.
So if you want someone who's interested in architecture now to be a person who understands the why and the humanities of it, you say that it forms people. How do you think architecture forms people?
Yeah, that's of course interesting. The architecture, like an architect compared to an engineer. An engineer, sure, he has to be very intelligent, smart, has to know how to put things together. The thing has to hold up and this and that. But that is his main purpose and maybe his only purpose. He's not really involved, what does that column really mean to people? He only thinks, what does the column and the beam mean to the building? Whereas the architect has to consider, what does the building which he creates, with the help of other trades, of course, what does it mean to people? See? So then, because like Winston Churchill, like I said, we create architecture and architecture creates us. You see, so that when you want, like the library here, right? I mean, look at it. I mean, the architecture, which is terrific, and it's a beautiful building, and it really forms the people that work here, first of all, as you should know, and the people that use it. Like all the little children that I see in the back there, they, even without looking at it or really say, oh, look at the, you know, it will form them. I guarantee you that those little kids, where the parents are, you know, savvy enough or so to take them here or send them here, they will never really know what it really did to them. Compared to an ugly building or a building like a factory, you know, where there's no
Nothing
ambience,
warm or no beauty.
Right, no beauty. And because we all are flexible, you know, we are part of our environment. That's why, like, living in Charlevoix will have an effect. Either people that are drawn to it, that are already seeking the natural beauty of Charlevoix, or the people that grew up here and became, you know, part of that environment without knowing it. You see that I would think in Charlevoix now there are a lot of people from the outside, but I guarantee you the people that are drawn to Charlevoix are ones that always like beauty, like the serenity,
and the outdoors,
sunset,
and
the outdoors,
being part of the outdoors,
nature, the balance, you know,
all of that.
And where the people who are born here, they have it by themselves. They don't even think about it, and sometimes they move away and all that, and they say, oh, because they may think the whole world is that way. It isn't. Right. And again, like they say in real estate, you know, location, 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 which I strongly believe in. Same in terms of architecture. If somebody comes to me, wants to have a house designed or so, first I got to know, where is it? Yeah. And why is it? Yeah. You know, why are you moving there?
Ah, yeah.
See?
Your purpose.
And then, right,
yes.
You know, then, and it's better to not own the property and then build, rather than to own some property and say, no, I'm going to build. And then you're more, you know, to me, first you got to know what you want to do. Like somebody wants a house with nature coming in or whatever, then they got to have a place like that. Obviously, it is true that not everybody, very few people have those kind of choices. Right. And that is one of the drawbacks of architecture, that it is on a housing level too specific, you know, like people that have the means and the money and the freedom to move, you know. But architecture can also be a social architecture, whether for low-income housing or for low, whether, you know, where people, which I would think is very important, rather than, you know, unfortunately, in architecture you get to work for people with money, you know. Right. And that, in my opinion, is an unfortunate fact. Which, in America at least, in Europe, everybody uses architects, even the smallest buildings or the most insignificant by law. You see, you know. So therefore, that at least, in my opinion, too, I've done some very fancy, mansion type things and what have you, and very simple and very plain and very inexpensive things, and I put as much effort into that
as you did
as into the big
others.
one, you see.
Yeah.
Because all that is important, and in many cases, even more important. If somebody only has a small house or thing, they could still have beauty, still have proportion, scale, and then, because that may be the only place where some wealthy people, they have 5 or 6 or 7 houses, and not one of them, is really that forming to them. And in most cases, it becomes just a status symbol. And then they usually hire status architects, and obviously the architects are the famous, world famous, and they get hired to do those kind of houses rather than the particular architecture that they create.
Well, let's get to how you got to Charlevoix. You came to America to the University of Michigan.
Yeah, after the war, when I got through with my building experience, went back to high school, which was quite something. But in those days, older students were in school, just like they were at the University of Michigan. After the war, suddenly, you're already married, all kinds of things. And so then the schools still were basically, I started at the University of Cologne after I graduated from high school, 1951. For my first semester, I studied history of art and mathematics, because again, I was forming my ideas, and I know that mathematics is important, and I know the history. So, but then I discovered that the schools in Europe were still pretty much closed because they had to be rebuilt, and millions of people waiting for them to get back up to steam again. Then I thought about my American situation there, and I heard of the University of Michigan as one of the top schools in architecture. And I thought, well, that would not be a bad idea to apply for admission, which I did, without really knowing all that much about the University of Michigan, and without certainly not knowing anything about Ann Arbor. It helped that I had a couple of, an aunt and an uncle who lived in Detroit, and then they liked the idea, So then I applied, got accepted, and then from one day to the next, I came over. It was just,
wow, that's amazing.
Just so fast that I actually left Germany with one day, actually.
Just a simple thing. Did you do all this correspondence with letters, or did you have phone calls?
No, there was, in those days, a phone call would have been the end of the world.
Yeah.
And it went through the tubes, No, it was just,
all through
and
letters.
I actually was surprised that I was that it was so easy, that the dean wrote me right away, and we're glad to have you. And I have to say, the University of Michigan always had a 10% foreign student body. They always had. They may even have more now, I don't know. But so they, I might have been the beneficiary of it. Then, then the guy,
10%.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
you probably
never
were.
asked any questions. I was just glad to get there. See?
Yeah.
And then, as luck will have it, it was Ann Arbor, which I loved from day one. Turned out to be a German city, actually, and they still had all the, the German plates, German this and that, so German food and all that. I felt right at home there, see. Studied, working, was surprised that it cost so much money. In Germany, it was all free. Was stunned that the money involved, which I had not anticipated. And I said, well, I'll work my way through school. Turned out to be somewhat more difficult than I ever expected or never thought it could be. but then I was lucky to get a couple of good jobs in the summertime for General Motors, and so worked my way through there in a very a difficult way money-wise. Yeah. You know, I had to do everything myself. Met my wife Gail, fortunately for me, and we got married as students, and suddenly, wow, there was a double whammo, and then that was the end of the Korean War, and I couldn't get a summer job with General Motors anymore. So then I said, now what? Then I went back to my early training as in a construction business, and started a construction company. Fortunately for me, in those days, there was no requirement.
No
you could
licensing.
Just say, I'm no licensing.
Yeah.
So then I started very small, you know, doing this, doing that, fixing up my old landlady's house instead of cleaning bathrooms and stuff, and got slowly more. Gail and I then were more or less, even though we were students, but we were part of the community. And our friends then became the local people because of my work and my involvement. And still, as today, our closest friends are still the ones from Ann Arbor over 60 years ago. And by the way, I got a call from the University of Michigan a few days ago. If I'm still alive, your 60s graduation
wow, good for you.
Is coming up this fall. We would love to be there, and you know,
yeah,
and that
have you
type
come
of thing. It's amazing how fast time flies. It seems like 6 years, to me at least. So in Ann Arbor, so then started this construction company. Could hardly go to school, was lucky that at the end of the semesters, in order for your design project, they invited outside architects who didn't know that I skipped most of the classes and that I was always on the edge of, you know. But then they saw my stuff and liked it, and so I was always lucky to get away with it, so to speak. But there was no choice for me. Gail, going to school, she was in education, became a special ed teacher. And
did she get a job in Ann Arbor?
Yes.
She eventually did.
She graduated the year after I did and became a special ed teacher at the Neuropsychiatric Institute under Dr. Rabinovich at the University of Michigan, which was the special, I mean, it was a high-powered thing. She also taught for a while at the University of Michigan Hospital, the hospitalized children. And then when they eventually here in Charlevoix, was a special ed teacher for the intermediate school district, 2.5 counties under her. I mean, not under her, I mean, responsible. To quite a bit, and was, in my opinion, did a terrific job by, first of all, pushing to include computers in the school system. They were just then coming, and they were all sort of very reluctant, but she pushed very hard for them. She also pushed very hard to introduce or to help the pregnant teenage girls who were shunned at one time, and she said, we have to keep them educated. And time again, we have now women coming to her and said, thank you very much, Mrs. Wiemer, for making me stay in school. And she actually taught them even if they couldn't go to school.
Yeah, well, I was the beneficiary of that. I taught in Pellston for a while, and I had a student who was pregnant who continued to go to school during my tenure there in the 90s. And I'm sure that was part of what Gail instituted.
Because I know...
It never would have happened.
Right, and I remember going to Pellston with her, the superintendent there and all that. And they were too much local, you see. She always had to come in like from the outside and also make sure that they were spending the money that the federal government had appropriated. They always had their little side projects. And Gail always had to, you know. Well, ultimately, she worked for the state of Michigan and then went through the whole state to make sure that they were the program. So she really was terribly important in education and terribly important to me.
And also those young women who
Yeah,
were pregnant
well,
teenagers.
sure,
Absolutely.
right.
Well, let's get back to when you decided. You told me a story about why you decided to come move your family to Charlevoix.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us
Okay,
that.
now in Ann Arbor, as a contractor there, now I'm graduating, and I had some terrific offers in Yamasaki, the one who designed the World Trade Center, wanted me to, when he was very small and just starting. I turned him down. I needed more money. I told him I'm very honored.
Isn't it ironic?
But, yeah, at $1.61 an hour, I cannot support my family. I mean, my wife at the time, we didn't have any children. So then I continued with my construction company, and I was in it for 8 years. I couldn't get out because one project and I built houses, did quite well, got to know around Ann Arbor very well, had a nice office on top of what they called the Old German Restaurant. And I
Old
looked up there.
Heidelberg? Yep.
No, not Old Heidelberg. That's on Main Street. Old German was around the corner on Washington Street, the original. I subsequently remodeled the place 100 times and all that. And we just loved Ann Arbor, no question about it. And the university and everything connected with it. But in the 1960s then, that Ann Arbor then was starting to slide into the drug scene, and they, the panty raids and all that. Ann Arbor was quite lively and
rebellious against
some called it the Berkeley of the East.
Yeah.
And I happened to work at the high school there one time, and I noticed that was very tumultuous. So I said to my wife, we ought to live in a small town. Ann Arbor is a small town, but too big already for us. If our kids, when they want to go to school, it's going to be difficult. We want to be where we really are, right in the right. And right. So then I went up here, and I liked skiing, by the way. I'd been a skier in Austria. I learned German, skiing in Germany, and the Salzkammergut. And I came up north to ski at Pine Mountain. They were just starting then. And then one day I was here at with Ann Arbor Ski Club, and I stayed at the lodge and said, wow, what is this all about? And all that water, I loved sailing. And so, woo. And then an old classmate of mine and a friend, a very close friend, Jack Beagle, local architect, who has since then moved away. I made contact with him, and he lived then in Bel Air, and doing Shandy Creek there, and so he said, you oughta, yeah, I said, I definitely would like,
come up here.
I want to be a contractor, I want to be an architect. And I said, well, come up, we'll work together. So then my wife was expecting our second child, and we had some medical problems, so she wanted to stay in Ann Arbor. So she was born at the U of M, and Ingrid in '63. So for 1 year, I went back and forth. Finished my construction job, worked up here, went back and forth, and that was when no highway in those days. It was all the old 27 and 9 hours or so. Anyway, it was very difficult.
Yeah.
And for Gail to be alone there,
yes,
being pregnant,
with
all that.
with another small child
right.
too.
As soon as, and then I had a place in Bel Air, and then when our second child was born, Ingrid, pretty well known around here too when she was a girl, went to high school here. And for a short time then in Bel Air for a couple of months, and then we looked here to Charlevoix, and she checked the school system and the zoning, and we were talking about Harbor Springs, but Charlevoix was the choice for us because of the education.
Well, and you
school.
said it was interesting to me. You told me that it was a larger community, and in that time, it was a larger community.
Right, and Gail also thought no matter what the school, they can only do so much.
Yeah.
Where Charlevoix at least had enough people, enough to have a curriculum,
There was music and band and art program, and in addition to the sports and the academics.
Right. Yeah. With me, it was the nature and the things, the choice. For Gail, it was the education. Yeah. She would live, wherever it would be best to educate our children, which is the motherly instinct, first of all, and secondly, the teacher in her. Yeah. And of course, I respected that. And then we were, and then so was Jack Beagle too, he decided. He could not just live in Bel Air. 6 children, to raise and all that. I mean, the big old kids. And then so we both then just almost at the same time decided to be here in Charleroi, and that's ever since, some over 50 years ago now. We're lucky enough to find a house that we liked and still do. And lucky enough, I never had to worry about my own design, which would have been traumatic, if not financially difficult, because then you want to show whatever or want to, and they realize you don't really have the means, because it's a tremendously difficult profession to establish yourself and to make money, because you always want to do more. It's not like you're going to get so much money or so many hours. The hours, I used to work all the time, go do all the time. So what was good for us to be right in a small town. I was able to acquire a building downtown with my office there, which is still existing. And so I could walk to work, didn't waste any time. One time I had a job when we lived in Ann Arbor, in downtown Detroit. I said, God, 2 hours, 3 hours a day, wasted for absolutely nothing. I had a job offer once in Toledo when Gail got her master's degree, and we lived for 1 year in Ann Arbor. I said, I'm not going to go to Toledo, that. Well, here I was able to do all that. And then after, or doing vice versa, during the day when our kids were something in school and their sports, which they were, then I was able to take off because I can work at night. That's one of the good things about
flexibility
a job like
of schedule.
architecture. It didn't make any difference,
I remember Jack Beathgrove used to tell the story where he would go to his sailboat and he had a drafting board and he would work down there.
Sure.
Did you ever join him in that?
Yeah, well, yeah. And then you do it all the time. You can't get away from it because you always want to do something. You want to improve. I say, why not put the door, why not this and why not that? Or something comes, you said, too much money, now we got to cut back and that type of thing.
So then you have to alter it. What was one of your first jobs in town? Did you do anything in town, or mostly were your connections out of town?
Well, I must say that to begin with, I never worried about the jobs, okay? I mean, the same with Gail. We got to do what we got to do. She was fortunate enough to immediately get a job, and then they were in unbelievable quarters. She was underneath a stair practically at the AT&T building not too far from here on State Street there. And then later on, then she moved out to Montage building out there, he rented some office space there. And then they talked about at one time wanting their own office, the intermediate school district. So then I immediately, through the connections there, I was happy to be the architect on that and was able then to design a very simple but effective and inexpensive building. I think it was like $16 a square foot. The numbers, I don't even want to repeat it. I don't really can't comprehend it. So that type of thing. So I did a few things around town, but my idea always was that I wanted to live here, and the work was secondary to me because I knew I would get work somewhere else. Our friends from Ann Arbor were then discovering northern Michigan. First they said, where the hell are you moving? And next thing they all start building in the wealthy fancy place. Yeah. So I've been everywhere, the Upper Peninsula, Drummond Island, some islands in the middle of nowhere. For Dr. Kahn from Ann Arbor. From Gaylord was a big area there where people were building. And the thing was like in those second homes, you could actually do a lot more architecture sometimes, more freedom than for the main house, you see. So I was able to do a lot of very interesting things, but they always were connected with traveling. And then my clients became basically my friends, or my friends were my clients, and then I went with them. When they did something in Ann Arbor, Even when I lived up here, I did it. And when they did something in Florida, I did a mansion for the McGillivrys and all that in Florida, and then they did that. The Lou Metler, who was one of my tenants when he started in the clothing business, when he started building in a different place in Florida, we did some fantastic work there. But it was because of my connection here, and I went back and forth. So actually, and here in Charleroi, yeah, I did some things, but not primarily. Did some houses on the Chicago Club, which Lights own it now, and then next to it I did a log cabin for Lou Metler. I did a house for Tom Duke and his brother on Lake Charleroi. I did some things around town, but that was more or less never my mainstay. My mainstay was actually away, and that was okay with me too, because then I don't have to, then people don't look at me just as the architect. I want to just be looked at a guy who lives in Charleroi. Right.
So sounds to me like one of the main things that you did that was really wise was to buy that building downtown.
Yeah.
Now your business and it's beautiful.
Sure, right.
And you've moved into becoming what I think is you have incredible talent as an artist. So you brought a couple of pieces. Would you?
Oh yeah. Okay. Right. But only because you asked me, right?
Yes, only because I asked.
Well, this is one of mine there, which it's a small painting, which is one of my favorites.
Is it acrylic or oil?
I got to look at it again, because I work in different media.
Mediums? Okay.
Mediums.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Next one.
Acrylic. I wrote it down.
You wrote it down.
Right. Okay, and then this one here is a watercolor, sort of iconic Greek.
Greek, yep. Mediterranean.
Santorino, I think it was, yeah. I mean, we were able to travel a lot because I retired early when the computers came in.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to be. Decided that.
Okay, I mean, and then maybe one more here,
Yes.
just
please.
for the fun of it, right?
Oh, yes. I noticed several things with, it had the tree.
Yeah, I like the nature,
Yes.
and then like here, you talk about nature, right? I mean,
Some of the pieces I saw, you did a lot with color that were wonderful. The yellow, so you're not afraid of color.
no, right, and then, okay, that's probably enough. The thing is, like, I actually like to do abstract too, where the color, and I like to play with that and balance it out rather than just smear it on the wall or this and that. And also I like impressionistic too, where like sometimes buildings or street scenes where the buildings are only sort of indicated rather than detailed, although I do detail because of my renderings. Now, when you talk about the artist, so to speak, in me, which is again only part of me, but it's been always my original part. I always loved to draw. And to paint when I was younger, and had that so-called studio in Düsseldorf at the time. And even though that was not to really be an artist, but just enough to be accepted, and on the lowest possible level, probably into this group who had come from Berlin when the Russians occupied Berlin. All the artistic people that had a chance got out of Berlin and went to Düsseldorf, and Düsseldorf became the beneficiary of the exodus, and all these so-called famous people were there. So lucky. And then I painted all the time. And also, as part of the architecture, I got to do the rendering. Now, traditionally, architects had to be artists too. It was only when the so-called modern movement, which unfortunately came over the international style, where buildings are straight line, no roofs, nothing, where you take a T-square and a triangle and you go like this rather than with three. And at my studies at the University of Michigan, I was actually in in the middle there, what it was, half the professors had still been the professors from the old school, which is called the École des Beaux-Arts, the beautiful arts, you know, in Paris, where then you had the beautiful details and ornaments and all that. And there came that international style when they left Germany, the Bauhaus, and then they had half the professors that knew style from Chicago, where they were mostly, and these guys then, the international boys, took over. Okay. I was still in I myself, in the middle there, see, and I felt like by the 50s and 60s, in my opinion, were bad architectural time. I never really went for that, bought into it, and right, you know, and the whole thing then it was too cold, too impersonal. I just never liked it. I never bought into it, and actually, even though my idea had been to become a professor, you know, teach architecture, but I could see I would be in the middle there. I would be suddenly, because that international style was pervasive then, taken over by industry, by big capital. They want to have that modern style, and then philosophically, and even now still. And I never subscribed to that. Why should a building in Grand Rapids be an international style? Yeah. You know, why, you know, it's the same like
more important in Beiran. To its own environment.
Right, and the material should be more local. For that, I'm just, you know, way out of sync with what's going on. All the architectural magazines, I canceled them because I didn't like anything that's in there anymore now. And now they have all the mannerism, and the buildings have to be tipped over. They got to look like they, you know, bizarre and things like that, you know. So for that, I would be, you know, completely out of sync with everything.
I think it's kind of neat that you've come full circle and that you're doing so much.
Right, and therefore I stopped architecture about 25 years ago. Because first of all, even though there's art involved, but there are too many other things. Yeah. With the contractors, the time schedules, the budgets, you know, and the engineering, the consultants, I probably wouldn't be alive anymore. You know, I'm now in my 88th year and I'm doing fine. But I know if I had stayed there, I'm sure, because most of my friends have all passed away. It's a very stressful thing. And whereas now my art is relaxing to me. I do what I want to do with that tree, not what my client, and not how much that tree is going to cost, right? Yeah. It's going to do, and if I spend 3 days, I spend 3 days. And then, you know, and it's it's the greatest thing for me is my art. It is my you know, yeah, I mean, it really keeps me going every day. Besides my family and my kids, all that, which I've been lucky enough to been, you know, greatest wife and the greatest kids that anybody could ever have. We're lucky in that because sometimes life throws a curve at you.
You said something to me that I took to heart, which is that, you know, architecture and art doesn't make you. What makes you as a man is being a family man. Right. What kind of man you were, what kind of husband, what kind of father. Right. That's what's important, and I think that's wonderful. And sure. I think that the reason Charlevoix, we love to live here, all of us, is that it attracts people like you, come from the world, and bring bring diversity to us. And people like you enrich our community and have over the past 100 years folks that have come and been interested because we all share the love of the water and the land.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have come here, right?
We wouldn't have come here. Right. So it's really been enriching.
Terrific, and the same with you. Yeah. Well, I feel the same about you too. You had a choice. You had different exposure. Yeah. You could have lived anywhere, and you know, but you were drawn to the place.
It formed
right?
me.
You were not. Yeah, you did not, and you also fit your life into the local life. Yes. You could have whatever, right? When you were a baker, you were a baker, and you were the best baker. And you wanted to, you know, and the same way you need a house, you build it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, and then you had the disaster, you rebuild it, right? I mean, That's in my opinion, is the spirit. Whether you're a librarian or a doctor or whatever, president, I don't care. Those are
that's
just
good.
titles.
It's good for me to have been reminded about that. Thank you very much.
Okay,
And,
that's it?
Yes.
See, I didn't even get to drink my water. Okay, well, thank you.